Okay, today we're looking at the resurrection principle. Now, I have for the last couple of weeks been filling you in on some of the research that's done in the realm of critical scholarship. And what critical scholarship is it's biblical scholarship, but they are people that bring in multiple disciplines like archaeology and historians and different aspects. A religious scholar will be one who will make their case using pretty much scripture only. To prove one scripture, they'll look up another to say, here's what it means, and kind of trade back and forth. But the critical scholar looks for reasons a gospel or any part of the Bible was written. They look at the time that it was written. They look at the circumstances, the history that it appeared in. And for most people, that probably doesn't make a lot of difference. But if you're interested in really exploring the nature of the scriptures, then it's essential that you start looking at some of this material that's out there. And there's so much of it that it's hard to know where to start. But what we know about the Gospels is the Gospel of Mark was the first one written. It's not the first in the order that you find in your Bible. Matthew is first. Matthew was written about 15 years after Mark. Luke Acts, which is it's a single author, 2-volume set, came around another 10 or 15 years after that. And then John was written around 90 to 100 to 110 AD. So it came along completely in a different time and place. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the synoptic gospels because Matthew and Luke used the Gospel of Mark as their basis. Today they would be sued for that, of course, because that's called plagiarism. But back then, writing was not, they didn't have the laws around writing intellectual property and stuff that we do now. But they used almost 100% of the Gospel of Mark as the basis for their gospel. And they also drew from another source that scholars call the Q source. It's the word is QL, I think, a German word which means source. I think it means source. But it was a list of sayings they theorized that they used that are not found in Mark. And John comes from an entirely different set. But the three Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, are known as the synoptics because they're drawn from common source. But why stuff like this is interesting is because when Mark first appeared, there were no resurrection appearances. There were no appearance stories. The gospel ended with the women coming to the tomb, found it empty, and an angel was there, or a being of some kind was there, telling them that Jesus would meet them somewhere. Go back to Galilee, meet them in Galilee. And it said that they left in absolute fear and told no one. And that's where Mark originally ended. And then a person came along later and added 3 appearance stories to that. Probably because it just wasn't enough. Matthew, Luke, and John have fairly elaborate appearance stories, but were not included in the Gospel of Mark. So the context for this is Mark was written about 40 years after Jesus died. 70 AD, 70 to 71 AD. And what was going on when Mark was written was Jerusalem was being destroyed by the Romans. And I think the siege lasted a long time, and thousands of people were killed. And the Romans went in and burned down Jerusalem. They killed everybody in sight, men, women, babies, children, didn't matter. And they burned the temple down. And to burn the temple down was to burn the whole center of Judaism down. It was a huge blow. And at that time, there was no big distinction between Christians and Jews. The name Christian wasn't even used at the time. You won't find the word used until the book of Acts, which came maybe 15 years later or 20 years later. But all followers of Jesus were considered Jews, as was Jesus. Jesus was a practicing Jew. Everything about his life was Jewish. And we don't often think about that kind of thing. But why this is important is Mark was writing at a horrible time. His gospel came out at a horrible, horrible time for the followers of Jesus who had been following for 40 years after his death. They continued to talk. Scholars refer to this as the oral tradition, where information was passed down by word of mouth rather than written. Paul was actually the first writer of the New Testament, and he wrote around 50 to 51 AD in his letters. I don't remember which letter was the first. But his writings were the only thing that was available for quite a while after the death of Jesus. But the mindset of Mark would have been one of absolute devastation. And so the Gospel of Mark, the Gospel that he wrote, was for the purpose of, I think, inspiring hope in the people whose lives were just completely devastated. And after all these thousands of Romans and Jews, or I should say Jews and Romans, a lot of the Romans died as well because the Jews, in their uprising, in the revolt, ended up with the upper hand many times. They won several battles against the Romans. But the Romans would not go away, and they set up battering rams. There were 3 layers of walls in Jerusalem, and they took them one at a time. It took quite a while to go through, but the Jews were starving to death. There was all kinds of crime going on. You can just imagine having your food supply cut off and all that for so long, and hearing this, seeing this great army outside the walls, just a matter of time before they come in. And many did escape, and there was a second revolt later on that ended up on Masada. So Mark would have been addressing people that were just absolutely devastated. His gospel comes out around 70 AD, 70, 71, after the destruction of Jerusalem. And it would have been a message of hope, because the people that embraced Jesus as Messiah, and that was actually very few Jews embraced Jesus as the Messiah. The Christian movement, they call it the Jesus movement, the followers of the way, began to grow when Paul opened it up to the Gentiles, to the non-Jews. And what the difference there was, to become a Jew, you had to become circumcised, and you had to follow certain eating habits. Your diet was very important. And the earliest Christians were saying that if you want to become a Christian, you've got to do the same thing. And Paul came around and said, how about if we just baptize them? Let's just use baptism. We'll get more converts that way. And they did. They began to get a lot of converts. But in the early days, there weren't that many people that believed Jesus was the Messiah, was the expected Messiah. So that 40 years from his death to the first gospel, people began to research the Jewish scriptures and to demonstrate that he was the Messiah. And it was not Mark so much as Matthew that really addressed that idea. Matthew was writing to a Jewish community. And you'll notice in the very beginning he traces the genealogy of Jesus clear back to Abraham. And it just all through Matthew he's saying Jesus was a Jew, is a Jew, and is the expected Messiah. He's proving that case. So anyway, this story unfolds. Jesus is put to death. According to Mark, this is the only gospel that was floating around for quite a while. And the story had ended in fear, that the women had told no one because they were afraid. Well, the other three gospels expand that and say that, other disciples found the empty tomb first, and that they went and told others right away. And so there's different stories, and the reason that they're different is because they're written by different people at different times and for different reasons. But that's one of the fascinating things that critical scholarship brings out, just one aspect of it. And how does that help us? It helps us see that the Gospels are the products of individuals, of people. And they're telling a story. And they're trying to answer the question, if Jesus was the Messiah, why are we being devastated? Where's the salvation? Where's the new kingdom? Paul, in his teaching, was the kingdom was going to appear any day, any moment. That's his whole attitude. It's a very immediate thing. By the time you get to the Gospels, we don't know when it's going to happen. When will the kingdom come? We don't know when it's going to happen. And we're still asking that question today. Christians are waiting for the second coming. The Jews are waiting for the first. And there have been several incidents. I mentioned the second revolt, Jewish revolt. They thought that the leader of that revolt was the Messiah. Ended up he was put to death also. The Essenes, who were contemporary with Jesus, children of light, envisioned this great war between the children of light and the children of darkness, and the children of light won. But during the Jewish revolt, the first revolt, the Essenes thought, this is the end, this is the time that we're going to make our move. So they went out and attacked the Romans, and they were completely annihilated. So the children of light did not win that battle. And all of this was uncovered in 1947 with the Dead Sea Scrolls. A lot of information we did not have prior to that time, we have had since. And there's a lot of controversy around that whole discovery as well. But there's so many things, it's very complicated. How this story got to us today is very complicated. I can say, well, the way it got to me is I went to Bible school. Very simple. Started as a kid. You went to Sunday school and it was all presented. And I never asked, well, who wrote Mark and why was it written? None of the Gospels had names on them. The earliest versions that we have do not have names. We don't know who the actual authors are. That was all added later, and it was explained who these people are, and nobody knows who they were. And does that matter? It doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's like that picture of Jesus I showed the other couple of weeks ago. We look at that and we say, that is Jesus. We can all identify Jesus, but nobody's ever seen Jesus. So how do we know that's him? And so we come into the Easter story, and often with the same preset mindset that we've come into every Easter. And do we really understand or think about what this thing is? Is it about an event that happened 2,000 years ago, or is it about something that's happening right now? And that's now my interest, is what is the resurrection principle? There's debate on whether or not Jesus resurrected, and it's a healthy debate. There are people that just absolutely accept it, it happened, and that's the end of the story. There are people that say, well, I don't know. And there are others that say it's not possible at all. In fact, Matthew wrote about the theft of Jesus' body. You know, that was one of the conspiracy theories that was floating around at the time. The disciples went in, stole the body, and they're going to say he resurrected. And it's a pretty good story. And we don't know if that's not true. You know, we just have to go by what we have available, and there's very little that's available. What is available is faith. You know, do you have the faith that the resurrection occurred? But the question I would ask myself is, what is the principle behind that? And Jesus actually made a very clear point of that prior to it, and it's almost a foreshadowing of what goes on later on. He says, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. And this, to me, there's no better explanation for the resurrection principle than this. The whole death and resurrection of Jesus, if you take the story and look at it, that's what happened. He, as a human being, represents the seed that was put to death, was put into the tomb, crucified. And after 3 days, according to the story, rose again. And that is the principle of the seed. You drop a seed in the ground, it dies. It's a slower process. You ever dug up a seed because you thought it wasn't growing and found out it was, because it's so slow? But when we do that in faith. We drop the seed in the ground because we know we've seen it before. But it's not about seeds. It's about the principle behind, and this is, to me, one of the geniuses of Jesus. He was able to take simple things that people were familiar with and say, look at this, you see how this works. This is how you work. There's something in you that does the same thing as this seed when you drop it in the ground. And you can say, well, he was predicting how he would die. That's how it is portrayed. But Mark was writing 40 years, or John was writing about 60 years, 70 years maybe after Jesus died. So we don't have to take this at face value, but we do want to get to the principle that is behind it and see how it applies to us today. Easter illustrates that life, not death, is the truth behind all appearances to the contrary. Say you've got a problem going on in your life, and you don't know how to handle that problem. So you're saying there's a level of me that doesn't know how to handle this. And so what would the resurrection principle be? I must die to that level. I must let that level go. I must let that part of me go that says, I don't know what to do here. I'm like the seed that's to be dropped in the ground, and there's a miracle that happens when that occurs. And we celebrate Easter in the spring because all around us we see the resurrection of new life from the dry stalks and branches of apparent death. And we marvel at the tenacity of and the proliferation of this mysterious force we call life. Okay, it's happening all around us. Would it not also be happening in us? Are we not part of this universe? We have a tendency to stand here and look at it and say, I'm here and it's there. But are we not part of this whole process, this whole presence in which we live and move and have our being. So any of the stories we read in Scripture, if we look at the spiritual aspect of them, it's telling us about that problem you're having in your life right now. There's a way to handle it. There's a mysterious process going on. Another parable Jesus gave was about dropping seed in the soil, and you go to bed day and night. You don't know how that seed grows. You don't know the process that occurs. So you've got this problem. It looks bigger than you, and you're saying, okay, there's something in me that's bigger than it. I just haven't let it out yet. I haven't died to my old self yet. If I'm worried, I'm still clinging to the old seed self. And so if I want to make progress on my spiritual path, at some point I need to employ these principles. I don't think Jesus wanted to go through his death. There is, Mark I think has the Jesus doubting, asking the Father to take away this cup 3 times. And who wouldn't? But it's the letting go that sometimes terrifies us. He ends that segment by saying, nevertheless, let thy will be done, not mine. And so when we say, okay, I've got this thing going on and I don't know how to handle it, but I let it go. I let myself go because there's something greater in me. I don't know how it's going to address, how it's going to unfold, but I trust. This is faith. It is faith that a greater good is unfolding through me now. And I've said many times, we don't have to know the answer to know that it's coming forth. If you're afraid, you don't know the answer, obviously. But what is it that's afraid? What part of you is it that's afraid? It's the part that feels smaller than the problem. It's the part that's hanging from the cross saying, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Who doesn't have those feelings? But we continue with the process. We die to the old self. We die to that part of us that is smaller than the problem. We let go. And that takes courage. And we move on into that expansive state. We may totally let it go in terms of even thinking about the problem. And this is truly the value of meditation. We sit down and we simply let go. We don't try to solve a problem. The problem is us, really. It always is, always has been. It's the way we see things. And what is occurring is we're letting that part of us that's doing the seeing die. That's the seed self. The seed can't feed but one bird for, one bite. But if the seed dies, it can feed many birds, many bites. Life is always creating new channels through which to express itself. Our work is to make ourselves as open as possible to the renewing energy of this resurrecting force, so that every point of our experience may expand and flourish. Okay, that's the faith in the living Spirit. It's, I have enough faith to let go, knowing that life is always creating new channels through which to express itself. So even though I can't see how this thing is going to unfold, I know it will. I know it is at this very moment. Because life is opening up. People around Jesus had no clue that there would be anything after the death. They'd seen many deaths. They'd never seen anything like a resurrection. So something they were not expecting occurred. That's the idea. We live in a broader universe than we think about, especially when we are experiencing fear. So our first step is to release fear. You don't have to have a reason to do that. I talked about last week that fear it's a state of mind, and who owns that? Whose is that? Is it yours? Or is it something you have no control over? And when you think about it, it's like if I'm afraid and I don't want to be afraid, you want to solve the problem, of course. But where is that fear coming from? It's not coming from outside, and the problem that we engage in is we attack the outside. We attack the outside thing so we can get rid of our fear. What if we release the fear first? To the point where we could still look at that thing, it's still there, but we're not afraid anymore. I've told you the story about sailing. We started sailing and every breeze was kind of scary. And when you have a sailboat, you want breezes. That's what powers it. And when the wind would come up, it'd get very scary. But the better we got at it, the more we would invite that. We wanted that. We became larger than the wind. And that's the point. You don't want to change the wind. You don't want to change life. There's always going to be a problem out there. And we think if we just get rid of that very last problem, that we'll be okay. But it's what's going on inside of us. That's where we have control. That's where God comes in. Because you were not given a spirit of fear. So God, what spirit was I given? Let's see it. Let's bring it forth. This is the resurrection principle. When you look at a seed, isn't there a potential in that seed that you can't see? That's why you had the faith to drop it in the ground. To do the exact opposite that you think it would cause it to grow. So the first step is to release fear. If you drop the seed in the ground, you've got to release all your fear that it's not going to grow. You drop it, you let go. Release fear, affirm that the resurrecting power of life is now lifting you beyond all restrictions, all uncertainty, all inhibitions, that your life is full of new possibilities. These possibilities are unfolding now, like the spring buds bursting all around you. And that is absolutely true. So I hope if you have a situation in your life that has got you up against the wall, that you can apply this idea today. Open your mind to God's resurrecting life right now, right where you are, and enjoy the blessings of a transformed experience. So that's the resurrection principle. And anytime you think about yourself in a situation where you feel like it's larger than you, you can think of the biblical account, death and resurrection of Jesus. Or you can think of the illustration that he gave, the seed dropping into the ground and dying. You just say to yourself, I need to die to this fear. I need to die to this perception so that something greater can unfold. And you do that. And you can actually transform whatever experience you're in at that very moment. All right? Thank you for coming out, and hope you have the very best Easter you've ever had. 2, 3, 4. The seed falls in the ground. The sun and rain come round. The sacred life unfolds without so much a sound. To witness such a birth rising from Mother Earth
the chill of night. My soul, it stirs in love. It rises from your light, your holy life. It fills the smallest places of earth and sky. For within you all abide. Oh, fill my mind and leave your wondrous traces. Transform my life, for my heart is open wide. When winter hides earth's face and chilling winds replace the warmth of summer sun, under its dark embrace, I turn my thoughts within. The blade, the shoot, and then the full ripe grain appears. New strains of life begin, just as the morning sun burns off the chill of night. My soul, it stirs in love. It rises from your light, your holy life. It fills the smallest places of earth and sky. For within you all abide. Oh, fill my mind and leave your wondrous traces. Transform my life, for my heart is open wide. Transform my life, for my heart is open wide. Transform my life, for my heart is open wide.
You've been watching a talk given by Reverend Doug Bottorff here at Independent Unity in beautiful Grand Junction, Colorado. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. It really helps us spread our message. If you would like to support us, you can do so by clicking the button in the right-hand corner of the video screen. We greatly appreciate your support. Thanks again for watching.